Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Title IX Insider. Remember to like us and subscribe to us if you're enjoying our conversations. Today, we're going to be discussing the show Adolescence that has been played and has been reviewed all over social media and popular mainstream. And Nandini is going to go ahead and introduce the topic and the conversation for us today.
Thank you, Dr. Sandy. Like you said, there has been a lot of conversation online about this show, to the point that I believe I saw news pieces and social media posts about how the show was going to be a part of the UK school curriculum, where teachers and like educators are going to break each episode down with the students in class, educate them in real time about these topics. And what's interesting is that it's not a very long show. It's just 4 episodes, but it's gotten a lot of people talking, especially, like I said, educators, parents, students, people on social media who consume just normal like reels and TikToks every like 5 seconds, 10 minutes or so. And the show, in essence, follows Jamie, a teenage boy who kills a girl his age, Katie, after what we soon realized to be internalizing harmful messaging online. And what makes the show hit as hard as it did, in my opinion, is that it doesn't just point fingers at one specific person, that person A is responsible for that messaging that Jamie has gone through. And it shows how there is a whole culture of silence, avoidance, taking a lack of taking responsibility and accountability at school, at home. I think even in places like therapy, perhaps, specifically referring to, I think, episode 3 of the show, can allow harm to really grow. And it really asks the question then, I think, that what are families, schools, and communities doing when young people start absorbing this kind of messaging or become aware or intact or engage with such kind of messaging? And how are we to prepare them to navigate relationships, public spaces, identity, rejection, acceptance among their peers? And I think this would also probably be a callback to one of our earlier episodes, which was talking about the perfect victim complex. But what stuck with me was also just the portrayal of the victim, Katie. She is, um, as soon as they find out that, and spoilers ahead, but as soon as they find out that she was bullying him online, instantly the narrative became, oh, he killed her because he was getting bullied. And in that sense, she's nowhere a perfect victim. She pushes back, she stands up for herself, she makes mistakes, and I think that's also the point, that the show reminds us, like we've talked earlier, that girls don't need to be flawless or they don't need to meet a certain standard to just deserve safety. And here in the US, I believe also this connects to the conversation happening right now on TikTok, on Instagram, on Twitter, especially during Sexual Assault Awareness Month. I believe Title IX is one of the few federal tools that we have here to address gender-based violence in schools and campuses. Um, but it was never meant to do the work all alone by itself. We often say that it takes a village to raise a child, and that, I think, in context of the show, feels much more urgent, because when schools, families, institutions aren't fully engaging with the digital spaces that are shaping the young people, these spaces get filled with content that almost distorts the ideas of femininity, masculinity, uh, pushing forth ideas of entitlement and turning ideas like vulnerability into rage or something that's seen as weak and something not to be engaged in. So, I guess all this to say, Dr. Sandy, when you've worked with schools and campuses on the front line of these issues, what does meaningful prevention look like when it comes to early warning signs? And how can institutions, as one entity in this problem, do better or engage better to intervene or at least notice the signs before harm escalates?
Thank you, Nandini. I think that it's a really interesting question, and a difficult one, because how can we predict the behavior of someone that might just from one day to the next, one second to the next, do something so heinous as killing another individual or raping another individual? I've always looked at instances like this where there is such traumatic events that happen all of a sudden, and individuals might think to themselves, what were the signs? What could have happened? What could we have done to stop it? And then you look at the individual, and maybe there were no signs. Maybe there was some sort of attitude or concern for behavior, but you wouldn't expect them to escalate so quickly. And that's where you kind of have like somebody that snaps, right? And just kind of changes their personality altogether all at once. Um, and so it's very scary to think about. Um, I think in this circumstance, I'm watching the show, I was mesmerized in watching how the dad was he never hugged his son in the first episode, even after his son was arrested, even after his son was denying that, he didn't murder the girl. Um, the dad never hugged him, even when the son was sad or distraught, he never hugged him. I found it interesting that the dad in this series only hugged him after he finds out officially that his son did do the murder. When his son, is found that, he sees the video, and at that point is the only time he actually is the first time he hugs his son. And I found that very interesting because I think with that kind of a parental figure that is being portrayed in this program, having those masculine parts that are not as emotional and don't allow for that emotion to show may have been part of the problem, for this boy, right, being reflected in the show because he didn't know how to behave or react. So he reacted in a harsh, dramatic way that is traumatic. And then his dad, you watch this dad, and even in the very last episode, the dad is triggered, and the way that he reacts, he's just crazy. Like he throws paint on his car, he picks up that boy off the bike, he throws the bike. He's doing things in such a reactionary way, which speaks to what happened with his son, reacting in a reactionary way. Because when he speaks to the therapist is asking what happened, and he literally he lets her know that what happened is he asked her out. She laughed and said no, and then he stabs and kills her because of rejection. The son, in a lot of ways, ended up acting like his dad, reacting, not thinking. And the difference is the dad is older, so he knows that there is a point where he must stop. The boy is younger. He does not realize he needs to stop, um, and not do that, right? Because the dad could have hit that boy at the end. He does pick him up, he does throw the bike, but he doesn't strike him. So he does stop himself. So that those conversation pieces between dad and son we're assuming, the storyline that there was no conversation. Um, and I felt like the last words that dad said, I think he said something along the lines of that he failed his son, that he was sorry he didn't do better. Um, in some ways, the dad realizes, and I think all parents, take responsibility and guilt very seriously when their son or daughter do something. They think, this was my fault. How is this my fault? And rightly so. Not to say that all parents are at fault for every single thing a child does, but there have been things to show, research has shown that there can be a connection to, what happens in the household, how parents guide children or don't guide children results in very serious outcomes, whether it's the child as a child or the child as an adult. Um, and so, yeah, this program is interesting. Nandini, I don't know, what did you feel about each of the episodes? I know there was four. Um, what did you feel about them?
I think I completely agree with you about the whole analysis of the dad's behavior and the impact it has on him. Um, because I think even in the episode where he's talking to the therapist, he mentioned something about feeling his dad's shame at his football games, and that's somewhere he starts internalizing, but in a way, he also looks up to his dad and he wants to like entirely almost copy him. And it also gives very interesting insights into um, how he views his mom. Because in the middle of all of this, the only time I think I remember him recalling his mom is when he says that she makes a good roast and then he just leaves it at that. But he also, I think, makes it a point to highlight how surprised he is that his dad takes such good care of his mom and that he's so affectionate towards her and he's so nice and lovely when he's trying to defend his dad to the therapist. So I think like you said, that with some people, the signs are not there. There may be like concerning attitudes or behaviors or things they may say, but you may not think that it's going to escalate up to that point because you don't think that someone's going to turn out like that, or at least you don't make that assumption about people moving in. And I think each episode does a really good job of giving that insight that he's had these um, raising alarms or raising red flags kind of attitudes with regards to his dad, with regards to his mom, his friends, how he views himself, how he views the victim. Because I believe the whole reason he asked her out was also because he thought she was vulnerable. And in that situation, she would want to go out with him. He didn't assume that she would want to stand up for herself and just say no. So I think, and I think that's what the show does so well also, that it lets you think that he doesn't have these alarming behaviors till one day it escalates to something very traumatic. And I also really like the fact that it showed that the parents are maybe not as in touch with what's happening on the internet that is surrounding the child in their spare time because I think somewhere the dad says that, oh, he wanted a computer, he wanted this in his room, we got it for him. And then you wouldn't think he does this when the entire day he just sits on his desktop. And but that's exactly what I've seen so much discourse about, even on like TikTok, for instance, right after the show came out. A lot of people were talking about it that there are these certain behaviors that lead into these attitudes and with the way things are like so accessible now, even to really young people on the internet and everything, it's important to probably take notice of the behaviors or the patterns of behaviors that lead up to the harmful behavior, because that almost can now be considered as maybe a pattern to recognize or a pattern to call out. And I guess maybe that's what even the UK is trying to do when they include this in their school curriculum. They're trying to bring notice to, okay, these are the possible patterns you could fall into leading up to these behaviors, which can eventually culminate into something like this. Uh, but I definitely thought it was interesting that the show got dissected so much. There were just four episodes, but it got dissected so much, and people till now are paying such close attention to the topics that came out from those discussions.
Yeah, and thinking about the mom, um, something that struck me at the beginning was when she looks at the dad after the son is arrested, they say, who's going to be that support person for you? And he says, my dad. And the mom, when she finds out, she looks at the dad and says, you know, what does she say? She says something. Oh, she said, why you? And I thought that was so interesting because maybe she is out of touch, or maybe she's recognizing that maybe she thought she was closer to the son because maybe the son and father did not have a close relationship. And that would be my guess that the son and father did not have a close relationship. And that would explain why there was no hug until the very end of the first episode. Because maybe the dad just did not show affection to his son. And kind of how you pointed out, maybe he only showed affection to his wife, but what kind of affection was it? Was it also laced with some domestic violence? Which we don't know because that wasn't shown in the episodes. I was anticipating something like that would happen. Um, but it was interesting to see the mom and then to see them again at the very end where the dad is now trying to make like an outing, with the daughter and the wife. He's trying to, in a way, redo fatherhood and redo his family, even though his son is not there. And you see that there's like excitement in the family. Like they want to heal, they want to be different, they want to be a family as normal as we would imagine or think. And then when the son calls, the reality hits him in the face again, right? And that's right. It's not normal. We're going through something and we need to look at the reality of what we're going through. But it was interesting to see them at least still attempt to try to sing a song in the car and try to be a family. And when the dad tells the daughter he wants to go to the zoo, she's like, "We'd never do that. We've never had a family outing." And pretty telling that she's vocalizing and saying, this has never happened, but it would be nice. So just interesting and sad. And I think it's the second episode with the officer and his son, where you begin to see that, if a dad doesn't reflect and really think, then maybe this could happen to their son, right? Where the son is kind of left on their own to determine how violent they're going to be, how aggressive they're going to be, and they can make a bad choice. But if a dad is involved, then maybe the outcome can be different. And that's what you see in episode 2 with the police officer with his son, where he recognizes and realizes, you know what, I should maybe spend some extra time with him, you know, and be a dad and not so focused on my work. But what did you think about the police officer situation?
I thought I agree with you. For a second, I fully forgot that they contrasted Jamie and his dad's relationship in a certain way with the police officer and his son, because when his son finally does open up to him and tell him about the stuff that's been going around in school, initially he sounds a little confused. It shows that there is like somewhere maybe a communication gap, or there's something that maybe, like you said, implies that the father and son again aren't as close. And then, but you also see that towards the end of that episode, he's putting in effort to get to know his son. He's taking him out for food. He wants to spend time with him. And in a way, it could also be maybe considered like he wants to get ahead before any signs come forth, and he wants to mend the relationship so the son feels more healed so that he doesn't turn out like Jamie does. And I also thought it was interesting just the way they contrasted the young boys and the young girls in the school. I thought that was also a very interesting divide that was taken in the way both were portrayed, because everyone, when they were, and I think this is probably my opinion or analysis of looking at the show, but when everyone was talking to the young boys in the school, they were trying to establish a rapport. They were trying to get to know them, get comfortable with them, make them feel almost like you're talking to your peers. And when they were talking to Katie's best friend, even though she had just lost her best friend, she was grieving. They were very to the point, get to business with her. They weren't trying to, in my opinion, they weren't trying to establish a rapport as much. They just wanted information on Katie. And when her best friend wasn't able to communicate as well because she was overwhelmed, she was overcome with emotions. I think there was only one teacher who really takes out the time to sit down with her and try to make her feel better. And I think that also maybe somewhere contributes to this whole discussion that from a very early on age, girls are expected to be more mature and adult-like and handle things with a more mature perspective. And so they are seen and set on like different standards, different expectations. And then for boys, it's more treating them as their age goes. And so they get, I don't know, but I mean, I don't know, maybe that's just my analysis of it. But yeah.
I mean, all in all, it's always going to be important for not just the parents to address issues, but also the schools, right? So you started off by asking me about institutions, and I said institutions, it's going to be hard for them to predict. I think despite that, it's when institutions and parents work together that that is what's going to be powerful in this case. Because when we're dealing with children, it's, as you said earlier, it takes a village. And so it really will take a village. It takes the parents, it takes the school, it takes the community, it takes everybody to ensure that individuals understand the boundaries that they should have, the consent that they should have. I mean, that little boy, Jaime, he said he saw Katie nude. He saw her breasts, online. It had gone viral apparently. And so that's why there was that vulnerable aspect that he thought she was going to say yes to him because she was vulnerable, because she had been exposed in such an indecent way. He felt that he could maybe be her savior, per se. And so, of course, she would say yes to him because who would want her? Well, he could, and he would. And in his mind, in a very skewed way, that's how he thought about it. And possibly because he was already ostracized. Um, and typically, when we have boys that are ostracized, feeling rejected from the population already, that's where we tend to see, when we have these school shootings, individuals with that kind of background that feel like they have no recourse for sexuality or they can't connect with somebody. They're, feeling rejected or neglected. Um, very similar circumstances that happens with Jaime here, with how he reacts and responds. It wasn't a school shooting, but I would say exact same level of outcome. It's horrible. Somebody dies and somebody's hurt. The community is hurt. And it really will come down to family, teachers, schools, communities working together to understand prevention, communication, and having those really important conversations. I mean, as you said, most people don't even know what kids are doing online. If you don't have that dialogue, that's where the problems begin. You don't know what these kids are looking at. You don't know what they're talking about. And so that's going to influence their mind. And if you don't know what's influencing their mind, there's no way you can adjust it. What are your thoughts, Nandini?
I agree with you, Dr. Sandy. I think that's why the whole initiative made by the UK government to push the show into the curriculum. Because I'm sure if educators in the class are taking like, I don't know, maybe half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour a day to break this down into conversations, at some point, these children are going to go back home and say, talk to their parents that, oh, we spoke about these things. And in case the parents are aware, then the conversation continues. And in case the parents are unaware, they would be probably, the assumption would be, they would probably want to know what it is their children are talking about. They would read up about it. And the conversation grows. Either way, like you said, the community gets involved, everyone in the community, parents, educators, the students, are aware of prevention education because the conversation started from somewhere. And I think most importantly, it started from a point where the children can understand. It's not trying to bring the education at some other level down to them. It's starting from a point of discussion or from a point of reference that they understand, that makes sense to them in their setup, in their world. And I think that makes all the difference in prevention education. If you bring it down to their level in a way they understand, they relate to, they're actually able to apply it outside. I think I've seen the same thing when we've done events at schools. When we've held events, when we've brought the point of reference to them, they seem to be more engaged. They seem to understand what the prevention education is about. And I think that's what's the most, in my opinion, I think that's what would also help get the conversation started.
Yes, very true. Very true. Well, I think for today, I think that's going to wrap up our conversation unless you have any extra words you want to say about the show. I think for me, the only thing I would close with is, just describing again the importance of the village working together to spread word, especially this month, Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And the fact that children are watching this in the UK, hopefully more children and parents watch it here in the US to have those conversations and have those deeper dialogues. Um, yeah, because it's going to be important. It's always important for prevention education to have communication, to increase that awareness, and then that leads to the action of stopping and eliminating all forms of sexual assault, sexual misconduct. Um, yeah, so those would be my last words. What about you, Nandini?
I think I would just echo your words and really double down on the message of the show that prevention education as a responsibility lies on everyone, and specifically in the month of sexual assault awareness, that the burden of the work should be taken over by everyone rather than just one entity or one person or one organization or group or whatever. And when more people get involved, that's when the conversation happens. And that's when people can actually start working towards effective preventive education, if anything. But that would be, it's echoing what you said, basically.
Okay, well, great. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next time. And outside of that, have a wonderful rest of your month. And Nandini, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Sandy.